Hello, my name is Laura Ustelo, and I wish you all welcome to this seminar on machine learning and AI in nature conservation and research. This seminar is a joint effort by the Finnish Environment Institute, SYKE, and the Finnish Museum of Natural History, Luomus. Both of these institutes work on monitoring, research, and management of natural resources, and both have also embarked upon using machine learning and artificial intelligence tools to help in these tasks. This seminar gives some highlights on this work from both institutes. Enjoy the seminar. I give the floor to Eero Siivola now, who will explain a bit of the practicalities of the seminar and also introduce us to the basic principles of machine learning.
So we will have two sets of talks. The first set of talks will end a bit before 2 p.m. and it contains talks from Luomus. And at the end of that session, we will have time for discussion and questions. So if you come up with any good questions during the presentations, or if you wonder something, post those on the chat box, and we will have people who will gather the questions and then can ask them for you at the end of the set of the talks, or then you can ask the question yourself. And then similarly after 2 p.m. we will have a second set of talks with similar contents. So post your questions to the chat box and you will get answer at the end of each session. So warm welcome from my behalf as well. So machine learning might be a bit unclear concept to some of us, and to get us all on same page, I will cover some of the key terms that are really tightly related to artificial intelligence and machine learning, and what's the connection of all this to deep learning, which is popping quite often in the modern science talk and hype. So artificial intelligence is a really broad term that covers all computer software that can perform tasks that are commonly associated with intelligent beings. So it's quite shaky, and quite a lot of things can be classified as artificial intelligence. And then machine learning, it's more it's a branch of AI that consists of systems that use data to learn to perform a specific task without being specifically programmed to do so. So this equals that the computer program can learn itself from experience without a human explicitly programming it. And one example of machine learning algorithm might be on your spam filter on your Outlook. And then last, this deep learning. This again is a branch of machine learning that is based on deep neural networks. And most of machine learning nowadays that processes images is deep learning. So here is an example of a chat box that is like a fully rule-based. So you can, on Iceland Air, you can, or at least you could a few years ago, reserve a plane ticket by posting these very clearly formatted questions, and then it just parses the text, and you can think this as intelligent, but in reality there's just some rules that are hard programmed, and it parses those rules, your text, and compares those to the rules and decides what to do next. So this is AI, not machine learning. Then like as an example of a machine learning algorithm, there are in lots of research papers, you might want to, for instance, find a connection between crop yield and soil salinity, and then you gather data and then you find some sort of like mean value representing the crop yield as a function of soil salinity. And even though this is regression, then this still is machine learning. And then last example of deep learning. So this is also machine learning, but this is also deep learning. So there's image recognition where object recognition from images, and this algorithm can detect what objects are in this image. And this is an example of deep learning. And artificial intelligence is not at all a new thing. It has its roots in 1950s from the mathematics and applied mathematics community. When the computers developed a bit, machine learning started to occur in research literature more often in 1980s. And nowadays, at the era of modern GPUs, the deep learning has established its place. And maybe the beginning of AI was this imitation game paper by Alan Turing, and maybe the first paper related to machine learning was from 1957. So what can we do with machine learning and deep learning? So machine learning can be divided to 3 separate tasks it can perform. And the first one is supervised machine learning. And in supervised machine learning, a computer is given a data set so that each data point in that data set is annotated with a meaning. And with this data set, where each data point has an associated meaning, the computer learns the connection between the data and meaning. And after this, after the computer has processed the annotated data, it can be used to predict the meaning of any new data point. And supervised machine learning can be divided into regression classification tasks. And in classification, the prediction or the annotations are discrete. And one example of such is a decision if this email is a spam or not. So that's one example of classification task. And regression, in regression, we try to predict continuous value. And for instance, we humans, we might do this kind of tasks every day at work when we try to predict how much a specific task will take us at work. So someone has their mic on, so could everyone else except for me off their mics? Thanks. Here is an example of how things would go in a classification task. So you get a new data point, and then you have a spam filter, and it classifies them automatically to no spam or spam. And here again is the example of regression, which I already showed. So we try to predict the crop yield as a function of soil salinity. Okay, then the second task we can do with machine learning is unsupervised machine learning. So in supervised machine learning, we had a label associated to each of the data points in our data set. And in unsupervised machine learning, we don't have these labels. So the task of a computer is to try find some sort of meaning from the data without human supervision. And this unsupervised machine learning can be divided to 3 separate tasks, which are clustering, which is the task of dividing the dataset to some sort of meaningful subsets. For instance, if we would give a computer a big set of images of butterflies and ask it to divide those in some meaningful manner, then that would be called clustering. Then the second task is dimensionality reduction, where we find a way to represent dataset with less hard drive space. For instance, on the era of Teams, we might want to compress this image of my face coming to your screens to be as data efficient as possible, so that we can save the computer or the infrastructure of the environment. So this is one example of dimensionality reduction task. And then the last task is association, where we try to find connections from data. And one example is, for instance, if we see lots of like receipts from a shop, then we can go those all through and try to find what kind of items are often bought together. And here is an example of clustering. So we have this social network where we have these data points and then connections between those data points, and then we can find out that, okay, there seems to be 3 separate clusters within this data set, like completely without human supervision. Then here is an example of dimensionality reduction. So originally we have this 3-dimensional kind of like roll, and then we can unroll that to represent that data in 2 dimensions without losing any information. And then finally, we have this association, where we have a set of items. So we have data set exactly from purchased items, and there are items in the data set, and we can find out by going this line by line that, okay, people who buy bread, they also buy milk, and people who buy milk, they also buy underwear for some reason. And last task that is performed with machine learning is reinforcement learning. And in reinforcement learning, a computer tries to find suitable actions to maximize reward in a particular situation. And this sounds really cryptic, but in reality, it tries to mimic how humans learn. So we humans, we do some actions, and all actions have some sort of outcome. And different actions have different rewards, and based on those rewards, we learn. So as an example, if I decide to go to sleep too late, maybe there's an exciting movie going on television, I'm going to be tired at work the next day, and my boss is going to be very angry at me. So I made an action, I decided to go to bed too late, and the reward, or not a reward, was that my boss was angry at me. And from this feedback, hopefully I learned to go to sleep earlier. So reinforcement learning tries to mimic this kind of learning process. So here is an illustration of this. So there is an agent that acts in some sort of environment, and it can take actions, and then based on their actions there's some outcome and they get a reward. So what is the role of deep learning in all this? I have talked for 15 minutes and I haven't said a word about deep learning. So, and although everyone speaks today about deep learning, so deep learning is machine learning that is based on neural networks. And neural networks are very versatile and powerful method for doing separate machine learning tasks. And these neural networks, they are inspired by information processing in biological systems, so brain cells. And why are they so popular, and why did they become popular in this 200 or like just this decade? So there have been some technological advances within the past 20 years that have made using neural networks efficient. So there is this method called automatic differentiation, which has made training neural networks possible. And this is a mathematical thing for learning. For training a neural network, we need to be able to compute derivatives or gradients within the neural network. And this automatic differentiation makes this much more easier, so that the user or the developer of the algorithm doesn't need to bother themselves with complex math equations. So automatic differentiation has made it possible to build machine learning models or neural network models fast. And then the second computational advance is this GPU computing, which has made it possible to train large neural networks fast. Because GPUs are just really fast at doing this automatic differentiation. Here's an example of neural network, which probably all of you have seen before, and this tries to mimic like a biological computation system. So there are these cells or nodes, and they have connections, and then you put data, and then it computes with simple math. It computes and combines it with multiplication and summation and simple mathematical equations, and then it outputs a thing. And because this is a network, that allows it to be very complex and very adaptable to new kind of tasks. So as a summary, there are 3 tasks that can be performed with machine learning. Supervised machine learning, where we learn using annotated data. Then there's unsupervised machine learning, where the machine learning algorithm automatically finds structures from data. And then there's reinforcement learning, where the machine learning algorithm tries to mimic the way humans learn. And thank you. That's it. And now we can give the floor to the first presentation, where we learn how to build machine learning without knowing what to do. Thank you. And if you have any questions related to the presentations, you can ask them at the end of this first session.
Thank you, Eero, for this introduction, and also to Laura for the welcoming words. My name is Eeva-Maria Tiidenberg, and I will be moderating this webinar. And as Eero told, our first speaker is Mikko Heikkinen, and he will tell about making AI models without knowing how to make them. Please, Mikko.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Mikko Heikkinen from Luomus Biodiversity Informatics Unit, and I'm going to tell how to make AI models without knowing how to make AI models. I'm originally a biologist, but I've been working with IT systems and web services for quite a long time. Currently, I'm working mostly with FinBIF services, that is Suomen Lajitietokeskus and the Species Notify portal. I'm going to show some projects I've done on my free time, so these are not used by Luomus or FinBIF, at least not yet. So one of these projects started from a problem. I'm a bird watcher, so I'm interested in seeing a lot of birds, but how to know when birds are actually migrating? For example, last fall, there was a day when a lot of geese, as shown here, were migrating over southern Finland, but I had no idea about it. I just went outside to take the trashes out and saw that a lot of birds were flying around. So I wondered, what if I had a camera that would constantly monitor the sky and then alert me whenever there are enough birds flying around? So that's what I started to build and try out. So solution, a camera constantly monitoring the sky. The camera part was pretty easy. This is a Raspberry Pi computer with the Raspberry Pi camera module enclosed in a plastic box to make it waterproof, and that takes 1 frame per second the whole day. But then how to interpret images, what to do with the images? This system creates over 40,000 images each day when it's on, so no one is ever going to look at those. Most of them are empty sky, clouds, raindrops, mosquitoes, quite a lot of mosquitoes actually, airplanes. Those are not interesting. And also I'd be more interested in knowing when there are flocks of birds rather than just single bird passing by. So these are examples of the images created by the Raspberry Pi camera. So the problem now is how to identify birds from all sorts of other things that are visible in the images. Would be movement detection combined with AI image classification. So I made a simple movement detection algorithm that picks the part of image that has something changed. So that's how I'll get these images showing just a bird and its surroundings. But then how to classify them? I've never done image classification systems before. I've been on some courses and I know cool terms like TensorFlow or convolutional neural network, but I don't know how to use them. So the solution is Google it. Try to find a solution. And what I found is this Google's machine learning tool called AutoML Vision. So I decided to try it out. So basically what machine learning is and what is unsupervised learning that Eero described for classifying images. Supervised learning. So it's basically showing a lot of classified images, categorized images to a computer application, and then let it learn by itself how to distinguish between these. So that's easy. It's not effortless, definitely, because a lot of data is needed. So it's not enough to have a few dozen or a few hundred images. You need thousands of them to make a good model. So I started to classify these images into birds. Here are some of the birds, then ribbons, which are these flocks of birds, flocks of geese. Then what else we have? We have empty sky and clouds, aircrafts, insects. Even in November, there were a lot of insects, and blurred photos like raindrops. Someone ended my presentation, it seems. Moment.
Yeah, I noticed the same, but maybe you can just try and reshare.
Yeah. Do you see it again now?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, basically it's the most work is about classifying the images, creating the training material. And how this Google AutoML Vision works, that user provides classified images, in my case 5,300 photos, and then the system creates an AI model based on these automatically. It's very simple, there are very few settings, and it's also quite fast and cheap. It took a few hours to train, to create the model, and it cost something like 10 euros. And here are the results. recall 93%. That means that the model finds 93% of the objects correctly, and precision 96%. 96% of the results are correct. So that was easy. What's next? What are the other things that I could use this for? FinViv has a lot of photographs of organisms, and these can be used for many purposes. For example, helping people to learn to identify organisms. We have over 300,000 images of insects, for example. It would be valuable if you would know which of the images is about an egg, larva, pupa, and adult. So I tried to create a model to classify them. With 2,600 photos, I got precision of 95%, recall of 85%. So this sounds pretty good. Not perfect, but pretty good. What else? The photos we have also are of varying quality. We have really good photos and really bad ones. Could we use AI to sort the images so that based on how beautiful or good they are? Since image classification always gives a number, a probability of an image belonging to a class, we can use this number as an index of a quality and then sort the images based on this. And here are some images of a butterfly, nokkosperhonen, and these have been sorted by the AI from good to bad and to ugly. And this looks pretty good. I would disagree with the second and third photo, but otherwise I agree with the AI. So we could pick out the best ones automatically. Image classification can also be used for other things like sound classification. So I tried to make a system to find animal sounds from long recordings. Sound classification works so that audio files can be divided into segments. In my case, I tried out with 10-second segments, and then these segments are converted into spectrograms. And then the spectrograms show the sound visually. And then image classification system can classify these images. And this also works pretty well. Precision and recall 91%. On the left, you can see spectrograms of bird sounds, and on the right, there's silence and other sounds like wind and airplane or car. So what I want to say is that there are endless of applications, and you really don't need to be an AI expert to create something. There are easy to use tools that can be used. Of course, experts can make better models probably. Google AutoML is not just for image classification. It can be used for other things like object detection or text classification. And other providers also have similar services. Google is not the only one. So in the end, creating training data, that's the bottleneck. That's the thing that takes time and effort. So the question is, what could you do with AI? Thank you.
Thank you, Mikko. Now we all start building our own AI tools. We will move on to the next speaker, Petteri Lehikoinen, and he will tell us about combining citizen science and machine learning for automated bird sound identification. And before you start, I remind all of us to post questions and comments to the chat. And also, please, if you are not the presenter, keep your microphone closed. Okay, let's move on.
Thank you, Eva-Maria. I guess you can see and hear me now. I can first say that Mikko's presentation was probably addressed to me, and therefore I'm here to tell more about how machine learning can benefit from citizen science. And in this case, it's a Lifeplan project and the bird sound identification. So here's the presentation in a nutshell. I first introduced the Lifeplan project and why AI is important there, and then how does the citizen science take in part of the project. First, I introduced the three masterminds or PIs of the Lifeplan project, which is Thomas Roslin from Uppsala and Helsinki, which is the ecologist, then David Dunstan from Duke University, the statistician, and then Otso Vaskainen from Helsinki and Jyväskylä, who has expertise on both of the two fields. And the aims of the Lifeplan is to kind of explain and predict the current state of biodiversity in any given point of the world. And also the aim is to use this information to predict the future state given the kind of current trajectories or projections of the different environmental changes which are occurring. And how these ambitious aims are then reached. The first key is a diverse sampling protocol or methods. There's cyclone sampler, soil sampler, for instance, to capture the fungi community. Malaise trap captures quite well different kinds of arthropods. Then camera trap is used for bigger animals, and then audio recorders for vocal creatures. And the second key to reach the aims of Lifeplan is an extensive sampling network and set up for 5 years. We have 100 global sites, and in addition 25 in both Sweden and Madagascar, which have this kind of hierarchical study set up from larger scale to very small scale. And within each plot, we have one cyclone sampler and malaise trap in the middle of the plot, and then within 100 meters from each other, all the rest sampling stations, which have all the rest sampling methods as well. And in addition, in the global sites, they alternate between urban and natural site from year to year to kind of get a better picture of how the environmental factors affect biodiversity and species communities. So why is AI needed in this project? There will be lots and lots of data, but the problem is that the data is unprocessed. So we need to make any sort of, or before we can make any sort of ecological interpretations, we need to get the species occurrences and the communities out of the data. And therefore AI is needed. Here AI can mean both artificial intelligence or automatic identification. So for example, in the audio data, we have 150 sites, 5 years of sampling, 5 audio recorders per site. That will equal 3 million minutes of audio recordings of birds and amphibians, and this does not include the bat recordings yet, so that will be in addition to this. And this equals 600 years of audio, so there's no way that one kind of persons or human can listen to that and recognize all the species. And therefore we need automated identification through machine learning and artificial intelligence. And then, well, like Mikko explained, what is needed for AI or for this machine learning, we need lots of training data. And how does, well, in that sense, computers are no better than human. We need to kind of learn by teaching. And how does then the citizen science fit into these pictures? Well, I could argue that the citizen science is exactly this picture because, or more precisely, it's the knowledge within, in this case, it's the knowledge within the bird watcher's mind. They know by heart what species sound like. And to capture this knowledge, we build up a pilot study or pilot project in Finbif, which is called Kerttu, which is kind of trying to crowdsource for the teaching or the training material for the machine learning to recognize this bird species. And here we have Finnish data of Finnish birds collected in southern Finland. And we kind of give 2 tasks for the users in Kerttu. The first one is that we provide an example species or example call, and then the computer of a given species, which here is common merganser, and then the computer scans through the data, kind of similar sounds based on the spectrogram. So here is just the picture cross-correlation used as a method to identify similar sounds. And then the task of the user is to identify if this species really is the species which it should be or if it's not. And by this way we get kind of very detailed information exactly where the species is occurring or if it's not occurring in that recording. And this can be used for kind of for example, the supervised models for different species vocalizations, and we can compare different vocalizations to a kind of species model as well. And the other task that the user is asked to do is to identify all the birds they can within a 10-second recording. So this does not give the precise or exact location where the species is vocalizing, but we know that the species is vocalizing within that 10-second recording. And this can be used, for instance, straight in deep neural network training data, or it can be also used as a kind of to test our other models, how well they perform. Are they able to identify the species which are occurring in these segments? So the benefits of the citizen science here, and of course in any case, is the kind of shared workload. We don't have to do the work ourselves, but also it's the shared knowledge. We get the more people, the more users, we get more knowledge, more work to be done. But also in this particular case, it can be beneficial for the accuracy and precision of the data by performing better models, because we use the same data which we use to train the models that we use the models to kind of interpret the results. So there's no discrepancies between the data kind of quality or the bird dialects, which can be different from different parts of the world. But for a beneficial citizen science project, we also need to ask what is the motivation of participate and engage to the project. And one of the main reasons here is the good-heartedness of people. They want to help, they want to take part of contribute to the greater good. And this, for us, it means that we need to explain well the research aims, but also the role of the citizens, how they perform in this task. And any other personal benefit is beneficial also for the project. If you can master the kind of citizen science project as a game or competition, that's always good. It brings amusement. Bribery is always a good way of motivate people, but also you can offer knowledge or even pride. And pride here is one of the very important tasks as well. You need to give recognition also for the voluntary work and also feedback, which is quite often forgotten. And I'm not saying that we are doing it really well, but you should kind of keep in mind that also this kind of requires regular communication, and you should allocate also resources for that. And for instance, in Kerttu, we have tried to do so that we show the users that how much they have contributed for the whole data. We show how much data we have gathered, but also give feedback of the kind of identification skills of theirs compared to other people. So they can kind of get feedback how well they are recognizing which species and so on. We also written to bird magazines kind of to explain what are the benefits for us, what are the benefits for the user to take part into this project. And we also have a Facebook and Twitter account where we share knowledge of Kerttu, also knowledge about bird ecology, but also to provide recognition for the users. And speaking of the recognition, I want to thank you for your time, but also especially Meri Rannisto and Esko Piirainen from Luomus for building up the Kerttu system, and Patrick Lauhan and Paro Sommervuo from Lifeplan who are working with the species identification, and also, of course, all the Kerttu users and different organizations and funding who are cooperating. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Petteri, for your presentation. We will move on to the next presentation by Ville-Matti Riihikoski. It's about mushroom image classification.
Hey, I'm Ville-Matti Riihikoski. I work at Luomus at the moment, and me and my friends, we made this mushroom classification app, which we've been using for a few years now. And we started with 3 people. We have Ville Laukkanen, who is the leader and actually the go-to guy with the machine learning. Alexi Sajaniemi, who is help with us with the domains, and then there's me, who've been working with Ville with the model and with our mobile app. So our goal was to, like you heard already before, we want to have some kind of input. In our case, we want to have an image of a mushroom, and then some kind of pattern recognition in there, which is the model, and then get the classification of that specific image. So in our case, for example, it would be a mushroom, and then it would be picking up some features from it, and then give us an estimation that it's not, in this case, this species. So we started by gathering a lot of images from different APIs. And luckily, there's quite a few of APIs available nowadays, and many of them are already have a labeled data in them. So it was quite simple to get quite many images from many species. And there was also, with some of the APIs, there was information about how well, how reliable the actual classification or the label was. So we used that a lot to build up our training sets and our test sets. So here's an overview of convolutional neural net. So basically, it first starts with like a small details. So these are all the layers that we saw before. These are all like places where they extract the features from the actual input, and then it starts with the small details normally and tries to find those, and then passes it on and makes a bigger object basically. And then actually at the higher levels, it can detect already shapes and colors and patterns and all those. And then at the very last layers, it's giving us the estimation and the classification of those from that input. So we took this Inception ResNet version 2, and that was already trained model. There's this thing called ImageNet. And we took those weights first and just retrained the very last layers. And that already gave us pretty good results. So basically all the clusters here are the things that are actually working and doing the analyzing of the image and extracting the features and then passing it on to the next layer and then doing the same thing multiple times. And basically, when we retrained these last layers, we already got quite good results. But we still wanted to do better, and we opened up the whole pipeline and retrained it with augmented data, and we got really good solutions. So that we were quite happy with the results, and it was doing really well, classifying the mushroom images and getting some kind of results out of them. I don't know what that is in English, sorry. So we built a website, for example, for people to send an image and to get the classification of that image and maybe even have a kind of competition who collects the most mushrooms. And then we build a mobile application which uses the API. Through the API, the model that we built, there we had quite a few people using it last year. So a few of the key figures, we currently have 195 different species recognized by the model. We are aiming to make it a little bit higher in the near future. The model size is about 630 megabytes, and we are actually running two models. One model is classifying if it's a mushroom or not, and another model is actually making the classification to the species. And we needed the two model approach because we noticed that people were sending pictures other than mushrooms. And for example, if you send a picture of a football, the mushroom classifier would be quite confident that it's some mushroom. And so we wanted to have this two model states where we could actually say to people that, okay, this is not an image of a mushroom, so try again. So far, we have gotten about 100,000 images and about 20,000 images app downloads from that. And in the future, we want to add more species. We actually have now about 600 species that we have been downloading the images for, and we have enough images for them to be trained. But there is a big problem with the models that we've been using, because every time when you add a new species, you basically have to retrain the whole model again. And that's very time-consuming and power-consuming task. So we want to also take a look at the CMU's neural network, which is kind of like calculating a vector or a fingerprint of a species, and then storing those fingerprints and comparing those with the new images. So when we would have a new species, we would just see if it's close enough to any other fingerprint. And if it's not, we could just add the new species in the list of known species and label it. And from there on, then on, it would just know what the species is. Okay, that's basically all that I had. Thank you. And I'll be here for any questions also later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ville-Matti, and great that you could make it here so that we got to see this presentation and that you might answer questions later on. And I can see that our next speaker, Andrea Santangel, is already waiting, and he's going to talk about using drones and AI to identify ground nests of farmland birds. Please.
Yes. Hello, everybody. I assume that everybody can hear me and see the screen. Yes, I'm now based in REC, Research Center for Ecological Change. But during the times when I did this project, I actually started to think about this when I was at Luomus. And so I collaborated with some colleagues also at Luomus. And I would like to acknowledge at first all of those collaborators who helped with this project, namely John Lohr from Lammi Biological Station, who was the guy of the drones and the sensors, thermal cameras, Edward Kluen, who helped in the field with Juha Tiainen from Luke, and then Yuxuan Chen, who was working mostly on the artificial intelligence, basically the deep learning algorithms, and Ravi Taiya, who was helping with the classification. So it was a really collaborative effort to reach this project. And the main rationale for this project was that finding nests of birds in grounds of agricultural landscapes is very difficult, time-consuming, and often you miss a lot of nests because they're very difficult to spot. We know that farmland birds overall across Western Europe especially are declining, and mostly because of intensification of agricultural practices like recurrent use of machinery to plow and sow the fields. And so especially those species like the lapwing in this picture, who are nesting on the ground of agricultural fields, are really suffering from this mechanization of agriculture. And as I said, it's very hard to find those nests on the ground. Even if you almost step on them, you may miss them when searching for them. At the same time, we know that agriculture is changing. There is especially a kind of technological revolution, whereas drones and specific sensors are used to monitor basically what's happening on the fields in a timely and very accurate, high-resolution manner. So if we can, for example, feed into this kind of drones and sensors some system that could, for example, allow the identification of birds' nests on the ground, we can perhaps try to automate this process and perhaps save more nests than what we can by searching manually. And Of course, this sounds rather futuristic, but at some points it will happen as progress continues. You can see now in this image and the next one, the difference that thermal imaging can make in terms of identifying birds' nests. You can see this white spot on the lower left image, which is appearing really clearly as a nest of a lapwing, which is much warmer than the background. And you can barely see it on the RGB image on the top. It's there. So basically, we set out to not only test the accuracy or the performance of a system that would integrate thermal imaging captured from a drone with basically a deep learning algorithm to identify nests of the lapwings in farmland grounds in southern Finland. But we also wanted to identify the range of conditions, for example, weather conditions, which could eventually affect the positive identification of those nests through this system of thermal images and deep learning algorithm. For example, we know that nests are quite warmer than the environment, than the soil, when the birds are incubating them, as you can see in this small inset image to the top right. But of course, when the soil is warmed up by the sun during the middle of the day in a hot day, you may get a confusing image that may not be so clear. So it's important to look at these weather effects, for example. We set out a field experimental type of design, where you can see in the A image to the top left, we scanned 22 field parcels around Lammi Biological Station completely. We scanned them completely manually for lapwing nests. So we mapped all the lapwing nests on these 22 experimental fields. Then we pre-planned drone routes, drones that were fitted with the thermal imaging, thermal camera, to fly over those fields and cover them completely. And we flew those drones under different weather conditions, for example, sunny, overcast, different temperature ranges, and also different substrate types, whether the field was plowed or unplowed, because this may make the field the soil rather heterogeneous and rough or not. And also, we flew the drone at 2 different heights to see if this would affect the detection probability. 15 meters and 25 meters were the heights. We collected all these thousands and thousands of images. We classified them. So this was a supervised system based on classified images for the nests. And of course, we knew by the coordinates of the nests where the nest was supposed to be in the images. So that helped a lot during the classification. And then we used deep learning through this convolutional neural network type of framework in YOLO 3 system to basically derive a classification system that then we could use to identify those nests. And you can see that the overall performance in terms of the precision of the system was rather good in avoiding false positives. But the system was not as good at avoiding false negatives. So some nests were missed by the algorithm. We also found out that the false presences were mostly caused by environmental conditions, like sunny, cloud cover or temperature, but also the type of substrate. When the substrate was very rough, you were more likely to find false presences, because objects that would resemble a kind of nest would be warmed up, especially during sunny days, and then the algorithm would misinterpret them. Conversely, for false absences, we found that the height of the drone was really what mattered. When you fly the drone too high, at 25 meters, then you start missing some nests, obviously because of the distance. So what we can conclude from this project is that the system has actually a rather good potential. Of course, the accuracy should be improved eventually, probably with more training material. So we used out of all the images, I forgot to mention, but we used 70% of the flights for training, and the rest 30% for testing, which you saw in the results. So this should be, of course, could be improved. And environmental conditions matter a lot, but still, this system could be promising eventually to help really doing some hands-on conservation of these species in agricultural systems. And this is the way forward that we see. When these systems are mature enough with this artificial intelligence type of frameworks, they could be eventually implemented within an agricultural system that would automatically eventually save those nests by lifting harvesters or sowers going through those nests. And with this, I would like to also thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Andrea, for an interesting talk. We will move on to the next speaker, Vasco Branco, and he will be talking about the age of the cyborg, machine learning in wildlife conservation. Please, Vasco.
Hello. So can you guys hear me?
Yes.
All right. Excellent. All right. And I'm gonna start. I assume you're also seeing the screen. Okay. So yeah, I'm assuming it's fine. Okay. So hi. Yeah, I'm Vasco. Thanks for having me. And my presentation, The Age of the Cyborg Machine Learning in Wildlife Conservation, is kind of a short, I don't know, like a short expo of what my research group is doing in Luomus, and it's very, I'd say, work in progress. So it's this weird mixture of my project, Asterisk, automated assessment of species extinction risk, and my coworker Philippe Chichot's project, food risk. So the basis for these projects is very simple. The IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, established for 2020 the goal of having 160,000 species assessed for their red listing efforts. And similarly, the Convention on Biological Diversity established the IHE biodiversity targets, of which number 12 was preventing the extinction of non-threatened species and the improvement or sustainment of the conservation status of these species, also by 2020. Now, as I'm sure you're familiar, these targets weren't met, and I'd argue with you that our current main problem in conservation is acceleration. So the threats that our biodiversity faces have been increasing well in complexity, but we're using methodologies and workflows that have the same capacity. And then if we want to meet these sort of goals, we need to innovate. So I present to you first Asterisk. So Asterisk is a extinction risk automation software that I'm developing with my supervisors Pedro Cardoso and Luis Correia. It is aimed to be an open source software for data acquisition and processing, and it's mostly Python based. And I will give a short description of what it does. So what is Asterisk, and how can it help this process of assessing extinction risk? Well, So far, it's already helpful in retrieval of sources, extraction of data, and then interpretation of this data. Right now it works, I put subcategories there. Yeah, right now it works with papers. One day maybe with more web-based sources, as I'll explain further ahead. So a brief example of what you can already do in Asterisk would be to take an online paper repository, and through web scraping capabilities in Asterisk, you can mass download scientific articles in that online repository, and then using OCR techniques that includes machine learning and through natural language processing techniques, you can tokenize, extract the text from these articles and then tokenize the text, displaying them in chunks that are helpful for achieving a result similar to what you see here on the right. So after taking these chunks, you can then cross-check these substrings with a taxonomy dictionary, for example, containing species that you want to look out for references to in these papers, and then you can take these substrings and detect when a genus or a species is mentioned. For example, in this case, Macrotel calpiana is classified here in the text. Macrotel cretica up in lines 35 and 36, for example, isn't, because it isn't present in the taxonomy dictionary. In this case, I think it's because it's no longer a valid species. If you don't want to do that, which it has certain disadvantages, we're also working on a machine learning algorithm that is capable of taking contextual cues in the text of the paper, along with other features that we're slowly figuring out, and really just process the text through machine learning in a way that the algorithm tries to understand through text cues what is a species and what is a genus. So you wouldn't need to have like a gigantic list of all the species that you might be interested in. It would intuitively understand what a species is. So you could take the product of this, and then you could join it with extracted species distribution data, which I'll also touch next, and you could construct a species distribution model. So I wouldn't want to pigeonhole Asterisk right now, but here we're mostly considering presence data, and this model could be something like maximum entropy, maxent, which I'm sure some of you, really most of you, should be familiar with. I guess it's pretty popular. You could then take this model and combine it further with your own threat spatial data, or Spectre, which I'll explain after. And that would be pretty much it. You'd have 90% of an assessment done. So if we could do this whole sequence in a quick and semi-automated way, it could really speed things up for species conservation. So I mentioned Spectre. What is Spectre? Spectre is, I'm developing right now, is a geographical information system product, and it is an aggregate of different layers of threats to species, all standardized to a common global range and 1 square kilometer resolution. It is very close to submission, and the whole premise is to have a very convenient set of threats to species. These could be, as I'm showing, crop percentage, sorry, or mining density. There's, I of course, this isn't extensively because I have like 32 layers on the product, But the idea is to have a standardized set of threads that could, really you could use them for anything, but especially for automation, it would be very convenient to just have easy access to threads. Sorry. So these are threads. The next step would be to extract geographic species data from papers, for example. So this is fairly easy. After you have the tokenized text, what we found is that you can very easily take mentions of places and and run them through a gazetteer and then extract the latitude and longitude of the places mentioned. This is from the description of a spider species, and you might immediately notice that there is no mention of the species here, and I did that on purpose because the real issue with this is the next step, which is taking these coordinates that you can extract from scientific work and then develop something that can understand which coordinates belong to which species, which is a work in progress. We have a couple of ideas, but that is the most recent part and the next challenge, I guess, in my project. In the really far future, maybe develop something, at least I'm hoping, that can extract information also from social media and other online sources. There is this very interesting article that was published a few days ago, I think, on automated retrieval of information from online sources. So a similar pipeline could be developed. And just to finish, I once speak too much about this because I don't want to misrepresent his work, but my coworker Philippe Chichot is developing project Foot Risk, which also uses machine learning. He's trying to understand if we can accurately model species extinction risks based on the information that we have on threats and species trait data. He started doing this project using a human footprint index, and we're thinking about expanding the scope of the project, I guess, by using as explanatory variables the threat data present in Spectre and species trait data that he already possesses, and then using a random forest model to hopefully get the IUCN risk category as a response variable. So this would be something this is part of his results, and this is the true skills statistic. In the x-axis you have divided by taxa. So you have like amphibians, birds, crabs, crayfishes, etc., and you have the true skill statistic for each of these taxa, with 2 bars, one for true and false, respectively, threatened versus non-threatened categories. So this is just a small sample of what results could look like. So yeah, I'd like to thank my supervisors for tolerating me, and the Kone Foundation for funding my PhD, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Branko, for an interesting talk. And our next speaker is Toivo Ydinampa, and we will be hearing about practical AI robotics, mass digitalization of pinned insect collections.
Yes.
Please,
Hello,
Toivo.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you see the screen or anything?
Not yet.
Okay. Let's see. Can you see it now?
Yes, I can see it, but it's at least your presentation is somehow mirrored.
Mirrored. Okay, okay. Let's try to mirror it back. How about now?
Yes, now it works.
That's good.
Yes. Yes. Okay, then let's go. Hello world, are you ready to be amazed? Okay, here is a photogrammetrical TensorFlow faster RCNN / mask RCNN robotic solution. Wait, whoa. Let's slow down a bit. What are those words? Is it even English? I think we should start from the very beginning. You know, in order to appreciate the goal, one should know about the journey. So, who am I? Well, I like biology. I grew up in the deep woods of Lapland, but I also like technology, like computers and robots. So, why shouldn't we combine those two? That should be fun, right? So, during my student years in university, I wanted to digitize birds, just for fun. But it was painfully slow to 3D model those by hand, so I did what most nerds do with their problems. I asked help from a search engine. That's when I learned to 3D scan with photogrammetry, which turns any regular camera into a 3D scanner. Here is a 4K webcam. It converts visible wavelengths into numbers, which is what our computers eat. So we take a lot of photographs. Every desired surface should be photographed from at least 3 different angles. Agisoft is industry standard photogrammetry software which calculates 3D models, like this textured mesh here. Nice. Now I could 3D scan birds with student-friendly prices. Okay, that's the basics of photogrammetry. How is this useful? Well, just before my graduation, I started my own company, and I started to look for important and somewhat valuable problems. And I heard about one, pinned insect collections. These should be digitized, but the problem is that the little label in beneath the butterfly, which in most of the cases cannot be seen from the top view. Hence, it is currently handled manually, which takes a lot of time and effort. Could those be scanned? Sure. Here I demonstrate a vertical crop. When digitally removing the specimen, the label can be seen in 3D world. Cool. This takes a lot of imaging, but could that be automated also? You and I most certainly know what a butterfly is, but I can't just say to my GPU to find those. We need something more. Again, I asked help from a search engine and I learned about TensorFlow machine learning library. Okay. Here is a data flow graph, but it looks complicated. Let's have an analogy. So, here is a dog doing random things, trying to get the treat. With correct behavior, it gets it. That's how it learns. That's basically how CNN learns, although there might be millions of nodes in between the input and the output. Well, what is the input? We take a 4K camera, which is the eyes of the machine. Every image consists of pixel values, which are numbers. We feed the number soup into TensorFlow. Cool. In practice, this is how the training data is being done. With LabelInc software, we have to label thousands of butterflies. This is the most time-consuming part, so be prepared and keep coffee flowing. Also, we can easily multiply the training data with image augmentation. Well, if we wanted to train CNN ourselves, we need a lot of computing power and time, both of which we don't have. That's why we want to use a pre-trained CNN model called Inception. Although Inception wasn't trained with all kinds of butterflies, so we are going to perform a process of transfer learning. Here is the Inception. First is the edge detection, then shape detection, and on the right we have the highest level of detections. We want to train the last layer with our own images for it to detect butterflies. We define the outcome and the machine learns the way to get there. When the training is ready, probably in the next day, we get the correct pathway in CNN and export it into a Python program. Here is a live feed from a webcam. It is important to use a NVIDIA CUDA GPU. It speeds up the detection almost 9 times faster. Well, we can also use it to calculate butterflies from still images, like here. So, with TensorFlow object detector, we can have these detection boxes and export the coordinates. But what if I want to detect dynamic shapes? Then I could use mask our CNN. It is similar with TensorFlow box detector, but it can detect dynamic shapes. How do we prepare the training data? Well, since the detection is dynamic, so is the training data. This takes even more time than the one with box detection. More coffee. It takes time, but is it worth it? Well, it could be used to detect labels from images. That could be something. So, machines can learn and detect, but we still need to move the camera to take the images. We need one final component, a motor, and a frame to hold the motor, and the camera should be moved freely over the pinned insect. And here it is, Endodic 3D. There is a two-dimensional movement with stepper motors combined with linear guided rails. It looks like a modified CNC machine, mostly because it is one. There is a hanging upside-down camera mount which rotates and tilts as desired to take images from every angle possible. One camera is pointing downwards, detecting the position of a butterfly with the aid of TensorFlow box detector. After a short photo session, the mount rotates slightly before taking the next images. That's the physical part. Then, let's check the computational part. Now we have a lot of images from slightly tilted position around the specimen. We need to reconstruct just the label, remember. We use mask RCN and instance segmentation to detect just the labels from the images. Then we feed these label fragments into Agisoft, which calculates the 3D model of the label. Cool. That's Endodic. If we still have time and the audience is awake, here are some bonus content. We could build an automated camera trap for butterflies. Here is a webcam and a DSLR on a motorized camera mount. Via webcam, TensorFlow box detector detects butterfly on a wall, gets its coordinates and guides the motorized camera mount, which takes the image automatically. Okay, and then let's jump into 3D world, if we can manage. Okay. So let's jump into Unity game engine simulation. Here I am in 3D scanned Tartu Museum Park. Here we can see something cool. This little guy here, called ML agent, machine learning agent, is solving little puzzle. He has been trained to solve it with PyTorch, which is machine learning library. This is an example of a situation where we could simulate our problems and machine learning can be utilized to solve it. So Thanks for letting me speak for this fascinating stuff. The moral of the story is that when in trouble, ask help from a search engine. Thank you.
Thank you, Toivo. This was cool. We will move on to the discussion part of this first session, and I will hand on the moderating to my colleague at Luomus, Anne Koivunen, please.
Hello, I'm Anne Koivunen, and I have been keeping eye on the questions on the chat. But first of all, I want to thank all our excellent talkers for very interesting presentations. Our presentators have been very efficient, and there have been a couple of questions on the chat, but they have already answered them on the chat. So if you have now some comments or extra questions, you have time. We have 10 minutes and before the break for the discussion. Floor is yours.
I can see that Laura is having a question, and then Leif.
Okay, thank you. These were really interesting talks and also delivered in a very entertaining way. So thank you everybody for that. Coming from the environmental administration, my first question obviously is that have you guys, I mean, this is a question for all of the speakers now. Have you thought about whether these systems that you're developing, how far are they from being actually operationalized in the real decision making? Like, how far are they from being really able to inform policy making and on a local level, like a municipality level or a national level or something? Nobody wants to chime in.
Laura, you have to name the respondents. Ask who is going first.
Well, I would like to ask this question, for example, about the nesting birds observations, because that seemed like that could be kind of close to actually being operationalized.
Yeah, thank you, Laura, for this comment. And sorry, I was too shy to raise my hands at first in the answer. The point is that I think the system should be improved. This is just a kind of trial, kind of prototype of what the system could include, and mainly to show that the workflow could work, that there is potential in this system, and when also the technological revolution in agriculture will really strongly take place, then I think we as ecologists, biologists, we should take advantage and be ready for that, and eventually enhance the sustainability of that through kind of these possible innovations that should be scaled up. But at the moment, I don't think this is ready to be kind of commercialized. Although we got, after the publication of that study, we got some requests from some small companies working with drones and sensors, for example, about the neural network algorithm and things like that. So there is definitely potential, but it's not ready yet, in my view.
Thank you.
And then Leif has a question.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, I have a comment and a question. First of all, thank you very much for all this to all the speakers. That was a wonderful session. First, a comment. this is all exciting work, and there's a lot of pilot nature to it. Well, of course, if you speakers you want to comment on this, then it could be regarded as a question as well. What I was going to say was that I believe that what we are heading towards is developing these systems into services available for researchers instead of having researchers developing their own little solutions, which actually causes a lot of repetition of the same stages in the work, and in most cases, I guess, slightly suboptimal final products. So we've been thinking about creating a lot of these automated services, species identification services and so on, to research infrastructures, and in this case especially the Finnish Biodiversity Information Facility. And we actually do have some piloting going on there already, and we have also just submitted a new funding application for continuing that work. So I see that, like in the midterm or fairly near future, we should see these services available for researchers, to analyze their data, so that they wouldn't have to develop their own machine learning based solutions in isolation. Okay, so that was my comment. But then I wanted specifically to ask a question from Toivo, and it's also about this, the readiness of your system. I've had the pleasure to see presentations by you a couple of times, and I see that the contents hadn't evolved that much, but I've been waiting for having your product as an actual commercial or operational product. So when will that happen? Thanks.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, yeah, I hope very, very soon. The corona situation has been quite awkward so far. So, yeah, it's here. I can reach it. It's over there. When the corona situation is over, I'll drive my car and I'll show it to you.
Excellent, guys. I hope Anne has told you that we still have some funds to invest in that final stage, if you need it in the project that I'm.
Nice. Okay. I guess we have to.
I'm not handing out dollars to everyone. This is your
Okay. I guess we have to get a cup of coffee together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any more questions or comments? I just want to remind you that we have a second slot reserved for discussion and questions if you come up with some that you want to ask these guys at the end of the seminar. But now we are having 10 minutes break and we continue 10 past 2 o'clock. See you then.
Welcome back. I hope you had a chance to have a little break and maybe have a cup of coffee like Toivo wished in his presentation. We will now have a set of talks from SYKE, and we will start with the talk by Iikka Hauhio, who will be talking about sentiment analysis using Twitter data. Please, Iikka, if you are online. And,
can you hear me?
Yes, and before you start, I will just mention that there are some comments in the chat. For example, the contact details of all the presenters have been asked for. I think we can include these in the recording that we are making of this webinar. And during this session that we are now starting, you are again free to write comments and questions to the chat box. Okay, now please, Iikka, go ahead.
Yes, so let me so can you hear my see my screen now?
Yes.
So please excuse me. I'm yes, now you should see my presentation. So my presentation is about analysis of tweets of politicians, and this is part of a project where we want to create a tool for automatic analysis of media, and one part of media analysis is analysis of tweets. So in nutshell, we want to find what topics politicians talk about, how these topics have changed, and how do they talk about them. And I will use as example a data set of tweets of Finnish members of parliament from this current election period. And we have also begun creating a data set of tweets from people who are who want to be elected in the following communal elections, but that data set is currently so small that I didn't get any interesting results yet. But so we have tweets from members of parliament from different parties, and here we can see how they are divided between parties and in time. And we want to know what politicians are talking about. So the most simple way would be to analyze what words appear in the tweets. So for example, we can search for words ilmasto, climate, and corona, and then see how these have changed. So here we have a figure of different parties and how many times they have mentioned the word ilmasto, climate, how many percentage of their tweets contain a word related to ilmasto. And we can see that, for example, after the coronavirus pandemic came here to Finland, politicians started to talk less about climate and more about corona. Even the Green Party, although the Green Party even now talks more about climate than corona. And different parties talk about corona mostly. But this has the problem that we must know beforehand what topics there are. So what can we do if we would want to, for example, corona is an obvious topic, but if we want to see not obvious changes that have been happening in the politics. So how can we do that? One thing is that we can look at the hashtags that the politicians use. That is an easy way, but not every tweet has hashtags, and that they might be biased, that only one kind of tweets have them, and some other things like the replies typically don't have them. We could do topic modeling, but that is kind of hard to do for tweets, mostly because tweets are short. So the traditional topic models like LDA do not perform well. So one thing I'm working on is to create topic models from news articles that the politicians link in their tweets. So that's kind of an indirect way to look at what topics they are talking about. So we have a scraper that scrapes news articles from different medias, currently Yle, Helsingin Sanomat, Ilta-Sanomat, and Iltalehti, but we are working on other scrapers too. And then we find what tweets link to what articles. And after that, we can do topic modeling on the articles themselves. And we would like this tool to be automatic, so it wouldn't need too much human interpretation. So we are experimenting with this kind of subject indexing software called UNIF that has a large list of pre-existing topics, like tens of thousands. And then it selects like the 10 most probable topics for the article, and then we can use them. So it will find topics that are meaningful, but we didn't think about them beforehand. Here's an example how it performs. So we have a news article about some artificial cooling of climate, and then we apply the model, and we get topics like climate change, climate, atmosphere, nature, carbon dioxide, weather. So maybe they are relevant to this topic. This is a quite large article that talks about other things too than the climate cooling. And here is the real text that this article has. So it has tags carbon dioxide emissions, climate change, science, environment. This has the problem that sometimes news medias, we use these existing tags as the training material. So sometimes these existing tags are somewhat non-descriptive or non-consistent, but inconsistent. Yes, inconsistent. But most of them are quite good. So we could use unsupervised things like LDA on the news articles too, but as we use this kind of model, it has the benefit that the user doesn't need to interpret the results too much, and LDA topics can be somewhat blurry on what they really mean. So it has its pros and cons to use this. I saw that in the previous presentations you were talking about precision and recall. So the precision and recall of this model they are both about 65%. And that may sound a bit low when we were seeing like 95% precision previously, but the thing is that these tags are quite inconsistent, and even humans don't agree on how to label the news. So in this task, it is quite good. Next, we can also do sentiment analysis on this kind of data. And unlike topic modeling, sentiment analysis is easier, as the sentiment analyzer analyzes single sentences. It doesn't analyze long text. I use work by Emily Ehrman, who has collected a list of sentences with her Sentimentator project, if I recall correctly, and I have trained the model to do sentiment analysis with her data and then applied it to tweets. And here we can see some results. So here are all tweets by the members of parliament by party. And we can see that perussuomalaiset are the most negative party and Keskusta is the most positive party by number of positive tweets, but then Vihreät is the least negative party. So here the blue ones are the negative tweets and the red ones are the positive tweets and the gray ones are neutral tweets. And this is like general results from all tweets that we have. But here is a different result with only the tweets that mention the word ilmasto, climate. And here we can see that when in this data, Keskusta was like the most positive and second most negative. Here, Keskusta is actually the second least positive and the most negative. So we can see that on different topics, the parties have different attitudes towards these topics. And for example, in climate business, it seems that Keskusta is more negative than it normally is on average. Then Kokoomus and Vihreät are most like least negative and most positive on this climate topic. And perussuomalaiset was second most negative and least positive. We use this data, both the topics and the sentiment analysis data. So we use this to create a tool where the researcher can input like what they want to research. They want these Twitter users from this time period, and they want to study these keywords, these hashtags, and these topics. Then it runs, scrapes the tweets for that time period and those users. For each tweet, it calculates the sentiment and the topics, and then it returns like anonymized data that only contains the political party of the user, the sentiment of the tweet, and the topics of the tweet, and whether it matches the given keywords or not, with the tweet text removed and the username removed. And then the researcher can like interpret these results. I am a computer scientist, so I prefer not to make too many interpretations about what these results mean, but the purpose of this project is that the political science researchers can easily get this kind of data and then analyze it. Thank you. This was the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Ika. It's very interesting topic and the results. And now we move on from politics in social media to quite different world of plankton. And the next speaker is Kaisa Kraft, who will talk about automatic classification of phytoplankton taxa. Please.
Thank you. Just a moment. I will share. I'll see if this works. Nope. This is some reason I'll do just this. Okay, can you see my presentation now?
Yes, now it's fine.
Good. So my topic is automatic classification of phytoplankton taxa. I work in the Finnish Environment Institute in the Marine Research Center, and I'm doing my PhD on the topic. We have this imaging flow cytobot IFCB that it's an imaging flow cytometer, which means that it takes images that flow through the instrument. And in this case, we image phytoplankton. And the instrument takes images or these samples automatically every 20 minutes. And so we get continuous phytoplankton data throughout the year, for example. And by this, we actually get tens of millions of images every year. So it cannot be gone through by hand. So I need machine learning to for the data handling. So we've had this instrument in the Utö Marine Research Station, which is a joint station with Finnish Meteorological Institute. And what is great about this is that we can actually combine high-frequency phytoplankton data to multiple physical chemical measurements from the sea to also atmosphere, which is so this is very new type of information about how the phytoplankton and the physical chemical parameters, how they react together. We have also used the instrument in experiments. So there are multiple possibilities for using this new type of method for research. So far, we've used this random forest classification method. That is, the codes and the workflow is freely available in the internet. The Heidi Sosik et al., who have written this, they have distributed it for free, so which is very cool, so that it's easy, or not easy, but easy almost easy to get started with. And it also includes this biovolume estimation for every image. So we don't get only image counts, but we get biovolume, biomass estimation. And this works very well, except, for example, some hollow colonies of cyanobacteria. But for this, it's also some improvements done, and I would need to test if these hollow colonies or filaments, if I can get better biovolume estimation for those also nowadays. We have published our first results about using this instrument, and it was about cyanobacteria bloom outside Ute in 2018. And we looked at how this new method, how it compares to traditional microscopic monitoring method. And it correlated very well for two our common cyanobacteria species, Aphanizomenon and Flossacque and Dolichospemum spp. And this oscillatorialis, which is a very thin filament, it deviated a little bit more, but still the results were statistically significant. Unfortunately, we didn't have any Nodularius fumigena in that bloom, so we don't have results for that. On here, the left-hand side, there are the time series during the bloom, and on the dots and the triangles, they are the light microscopy samples, and then the black line is IFCB samples. So we can see that very nicely that, especially in the case of Dolichospemum, which is in the middle, the microscopy samples, they go very well with the time series. There are some deviations with Aphanizomenon, but mostly they go pretty nicely. And this image actually tells very interesting thing that if we would sample only once a week and do the light microscopic analysis, we would have actually missed most of the bloom peak period of the bloom during that time, which is highlighted in this red. So just to give you an idea that this new type of looking into the phytoplankton community, it can give us very interesting information, which would be impossible to acquire with traditional methods. So we have about 50 categories in our classifier and 60,000 plus annotated images. Of course, not all the classes work very well, but we've had very good results for all the classes as well, especially with our new method, which is utilizing convolutional neural networks. We've had over, if I remember correct, over 98% overall accuracy for the classifier. So so we have this idea, and actually it mostly is already working and running, that we transfer the data from the Ute station automatically utilizing this CSC alles object storage, and we have this virtual computer where the CNN model is running in batches, for example, in every hour or so, and it's doing the classification of the new samples automatically, as well as the biovolume estimation. And so we get almost near real-time classification of the phytoplankton community in the outside Uutö station at the moment. But of course, this pipeline, or how you call it, it can be then taken to different instruments and also to different environments. If we have, for example, different location where we want to deploy the instrument. We also have had this Academy of Finland project, Fast Vision, where we've been developing the plankton image recognition with computer vision and pattern recognition laboratory of Lappeenranta Lahti University of Technology. And actually today we heard that there will be a Fast Vision Plus, so a 4-year project where we will still develop these methods further. So for the work, there is multiple projects related. So we are part of Jericho Next, Jericho S3, European-wide projects, and also we're using or utilizing the FinMari research infrastructure, and now the Academy of Finland project Fast Vision Plus will continue of this. So here are also some references if you're interested. Thank you. I think I kept my time very well.
Thank you, Kaisa, for an excellent talk. The next talk is also dealing with water environments, and it's presented by Jenni Attila, and the topic is AI for monitoring marine and lake water quality with Earth observations. Please, Jenni.
Okay, so can you see my slides now?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm going to tell you how we are using mostly machine learning methods for monitoring marine and lake water quality with Earth observations. So that is the satellite observations. And this is work that has been done for a long period of time. When I was studying somewhere at the 90s, we had a lot of interesting lectures about pattern recognition, digital image processing, and supervised and unsupervised classification. So the background was already there more than 20 years ago. Since that, satellite instruments, they have developed huge steps, and there are modern instruments where the machine learning methods are much more practical than it used to be in the old days. In the background, you can see the Finnish archipelago and some of the very interesting phenomena over there, which are particularly important for environmental monitoring. At the left corner, there are some hints of cyanobacteria bloom, and at the right side, there is a river estuary that is really reddish, and that is because of the humic substances that come from the drainage basin to the coastal waters. And one of the things in the environmental monitoring that we need to be aware of are the human impacts, and for water quality, the interesting thing is also how the drainage basin influences on our coastal waters. And as you can see, the Finnish archipelago is really scattered. That applies for the many regions in Finnish coastal areas and also in the lakes. And that's why we need really high resolution satellite instruments if we want to utilize the data in status assessment and water quality estimation. Well, the satellite instruments, they are already used a lot in other applications also than water quality, which I'm talking today for in the environmental monitoring. And the backbone for the European side is the Copernicus program set by the European Union, and we all pay for this data because we are part of it. It sets a series of Sentinel satellites with really practical instruments for detecting the environment, and not only in Finland and in the Baltic Sea, but in global means. And since the past, I'd say 5 years, a lot of development has been done to utilize this data also in global means. And for that, machine learning methods are really the keywords, how to utilize this huge amount of data in effective ways in global, but also in regional scales. And there are available archives for that if you want to check for yourselves for your applications. For the water quality in particular, and what we are doing for the Baltic Sea for status assessment, especially for eutrophication and also for Finnish lakes, for example, for the Water Framework Directive reporting that has been where Earth observation data has been applied in Finland for a couple of rounds already. Machine learning methods are the basics of our calculations. They provide automated statistics on daily non-cloudy observations of water quality, but also water quality as maps of aggregated, for example, as an estimate of chlorophyll A, which describes the amount of algae in the water for the whole summer period. And also cyanobacteria is one of our regular summer jobs as part of the algae bloom weekly press releases. What we use from the algorithm side and from the machine learning methods, they are mostly biooptical inversion models based on neural networks, and we utilize them as part of our automated data processing chains. And the other interesting part is to detect clouds from the images and to separate the cloudy parts from the non-cloudy parts, which we are interested in. And this is something that Eero mentioned at his introductory slide as the supervised classification algorithm. And what we are doing now and for the next 2 years within a project that is especially focusing on machine learning methods and on taking into use new machine learning method algorithms in our current processing data flow. This is a Coreo project where we got funded by the Ministry of Treasures that finances this kind of development for automated, including automated and machine learning parts for some of the problems or applications in governmental institutions. But this is just one of our projects. This is here as a case example what we can do. And as I mentioned already, our motivation is highly related to Finland's directive obligations and for providing meaningful observations for status assessment for Finnish coastal waters and lakes, but also for the open parts of the Baltic Sea. And our inspiration is highly the Copernicus program by the EU, but also we utilize the data provided by NASA. Our user want to see only the most important part of the huge satellite data flow that comes daily and is available, and especially Finnish land side is really cloudy. So we want to do more for showing the users only the interesting parts of this data flow. And this applies especially for the regional centers that are concerned with their specific lakes and specific coastal areas. And we as method developers, we want to make the most of the pan-European cloud computing services that are now, sorry for the voice, developing and with the global archive of satellite images. And we want to also fasten up our development and experiments with machine learning methods. And for that, we are building a new system for sort of integrating our research and experiments with functional machine learning methods to the automated processing as part of it. And I mentioned that we have these services. We have Tarkka, this is open service for water quality products and over Finnish lakes and the Baltic Sea. It's used by environmental authorities. A lot of media utilizes it, especially in the summertime with the cyanobacteria bloom, but also for citizens. This is information that attracts a lot, especially people who are on their summer cottages or the fishery. People who are going for fishing, they want to know the water temperature, for example. And also we provide statistics that are based on a chain of machine learning methods to our database status, or the interfaces status, where the users who are only the environmental authorities. And before we can provide them the time series and distributions of satellite observations integrated into the station sampling data, a lot of machine learning method phases, but also human interaction has happened. But the processing is already automated. For the next summer, this is a snapshot of Lake Pyhäjärvi in Säkylä. This will be one of our demonstration areas for cyanobacteria watch over the Finnish lakes. There will be lots of lakes like this where we provide only the interesting parts of the satellite observations for that particular lake. And green areas over the lakes, they are the areas with the cyanobacteria blooms. And this is what is of high interest to media and the citizens and the regional centers that are concerned with this lake. Our processing chains that we are using where we are now, I already mentioned that we use remove the cloudy areas with machine learning methods, and then we use water quality algorithms that are mainly machine learning methods, mostly neural networks, but others are used also. And then we provide the statistics and maps. And before we do, there is a human interaction phase quality check that we want to reduce in the future to get rid of that part further. But still we do need it before we can provide the satellite images as impressive scenes without too much error included in them. What we are now building for faster and more adaptive machine learning algorithm chains or systems, we want to make certain that what we do in the research side is sort of shift into the production phase in the future without any changes. And this is actually quite important part with the processing chain that is constantly developing. What comes from the research must go to the production in a way that it was planned. Summary, conclusions. I would say that based on the experiments that we have for some years now, in our dreams, the future is always really clear. We can do a lot with artificial intelligent methods. Machine learnings, they are really practical in image processing in many steps of it. But in practice, there are always some steps that we need to make, and some of these steps can be really tricky before the methods are really functional parts of automated processing. And sometimes even the very simple ideas that we've had for like 3 years ago, they need a lot of effort to reach the phase where it is good enough to be part of the processing. And we have learned also that sometimes we put some part of it to the automated processing that should have been checked perhaps a little more carefully. So there is human interaction in every part and possibilities in human errors, although a lot is already done with machine learning methods. Okay, but for the future, what there is for the society with the Earth observation data and the background, the machine learning method, it does interest the media. And this is what we want to bring up more in the future to ease up this kind of uses of satellite images, that there are already lots of examples, for example, these ones for the past year. Okay, thank you. These are the contact information, and if you want to follow us in Twitter or learn more about TARC.
Thanks a lot, Jenny, for this talk about this very important, or these important applications of the AI methods. We will now move on to the next speaker, Mikko Impiö, and the topic is enhancing biotope classifications with deep learning. Please, Mikko.
Yes, thank you. Just a minute. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, so my name is Mikko Impiö and I'm at the Environment Institute also. I've been here since last autumn and I'm finishing up my studies at Tampere University, where I study computer science, and this project has been my master's thesis project. The problem itself is this biotope classification, where we want to classify different land areas to different biotopes. And this is important because a large amount of these habitats and biotopes are endangered and they need to be monitored. And there's quite a lot of ingenious biotopes typical to northern Lapland. And this project has been one of this project's main purposes has been to map these biotopes in the northern Lapland. And this is a classic classification problem where we have an input and we have some kind of model, and we're going to output the class of the input. And in this case, we want to classify these like pixel-wise classifications, because we're using this remote sensing data and satellite imagery where the resolution is 10 by 10 meters. So there's a lot of going on inside a 10 by 10 meter square. And we're going to classify that square into some classes. For example, these general biotope classes, which are used by Metsähallitus, or these Natura 2000 classes that are used all over Europe. This is quite a challenging problem because these classes themselves might be easily distinguished in nature, but they might look very similar or almost identical from space or from this 10 by 10 raster image. And also challenges are that this data is often highly unbalanced. There's a lot of common classes and there's a lot of classes with only a few examples. And this is also a problem because these machine learning models need a lot of examples to train correctly, but also these small classes are often the ones that we're most interested in. But often, if we don't have enough images from them, we will get poor performance. And as you will see, this classification taxonomy, for example, this biotope classification or the Natura 2000 classification plays a big part, because different classes might be easier to distinguish from above. And also this data annotation is quite expensive, so we have only these point-wise data annotations per pixel. But the dataset used here is itself very high quality. It was collected by Metsähallitus in summer 2020, and they have these over 2,000 training points, or these annotated points from Northern Lapland. And these have quite a high imbalance. A lot of points belong to like 5 or 6 different classes, and there's like 36 different classes that in total. So there's a lot of classes with only a few examples, and this brings a more challenge to the problem. And this remote sensing data that we're using as an input is this Copernicus Sentinel-2 imagery, and there's also combined this laser scanning data where we can calculate the vegetation height and canopy cover, and also this phenology data where we have this NDVI sum and amplitude and maximum NDVI, which tells us the like temporal information over the growing period of the vegetation. These data were collected by, for example, Markus Törmä and Kristin Böttner here at SYKE. These have been really helpful for me. So the question is now where deep learning can help in this problem. There's a classic method of using random forests or some other machine learning methods to classify these pixels to different classes, but the idea here was that deep learning could help, because if we have enough data, we can use the pixel surroundings and extract some patterns that are typical to this different class we are going to classify, and these deep learning models can learn more complex patterns from this data. And this deep learning can be used either in classification or clustering, as we can see. In clustering, we are highly dependent on the classification taxonomy and the annotated classes, but in clustering, we can also use this higher amount of data extract straight from the rasters themselves. So let's first look at the classification results and then the unsupervised clustering and segmentation results. Because the data set is fairly small for deep learning purposes, I got a lot of better results by using this larger data set that was randomly collected from the Lapland without labels. And we use the labeled data to teach a teacher model, and then this teacher model uses these unlabeled data set images to produce these pseudo labels that are used when training this student model. And this improves the classification accuracy quite a lot. So if you have a small data set, you should definitely check into this semi-supervised learning and learning from this data if you have a larger data set without annotations. Here's some numerical results. These have quite a skew in the, for example, in the F1 score, because there's a lot of classes with only few labels. So if the model fails at even a few classes, it drops the F1 score quite a lot. We can see that in the general biotope class, the top 3 accuracy is fairly good, even though it's a really challenging problem. And we have this hybrid model that is made by averaging the random forest and the CNN outputs. And we can see that in this finer classification level, we get better results, but when we go to the coarser levels, the random forest is actually better. And the same thing for Natura 2000 classes. We see that in the finer classification level, where the classes are more fine-grained, we get better results. But when we go higher up, for example, only forest or mire or rock area level, we get better results with the random forest. I think these visual explanations give a better picture how the model is performing. This CNN and random forest hybrid produces more like they are not so fractured as the random forest images. And one of the results from this project and this classification model has been these class presence heat maps, which can be used to find certain classes from the environment. And for example, here we have the fell mountain birch areas with the CNN and the random forest, and we can see that the random forest is more finely grained than the CNN, but the CNN is more like cohescent. One of the better parts of the CNN is that because it looks at the surroundings of the pixel, it can detect these more complex classes. For example, these birch areas that are inside the fells, or these balsa mires that have this kind of special texture to them. So the CNN detects these much better than the random forest. Yeah, so one of the products here has been the classification for the entire northern Lapland area. And we also have these random forest confidence maps that tell the confidence of the highest class for a classifier. So we can use these, for example, in future work to determine areas that we need to collect more data from. Then we can see the unsupervised segmentation part, where we use purely the large data set to produce these clusterings, which simultaneously segments and gives a semantic meaning to the cluster or the segment. And we can see that it produces these maps that are quite true to the underlying nature, because it has only the data itself and not the labels messing things up. And these have also been produced for the entire Lapland area. And this is an visualization of how the unsupervised segmentation compares to these more traditional segmentation methods that use only like pixel similarity in the immediate vicinity. You can see that in the more green areas, the unsupervised segmentation method learns these texture areas better than the reference model that is really fractured in these areas. And here is a more close-up image from the same areas. And these also contain the semantic information, so we can find these similar areas from anywhere in the image. And to conclude this presentation, I will give you a few tips if you have a similar use case. The data itself is a really huge part in this project. The phenology features increase the classification accuracy and the F1 score by a lot, because it's really high quality data with a large time span. These unsupervised methods can help also. So if you have a large data set that is not annotated, you can also use that to improve the classification. And the metrics also are very important, that what classification taxonomy you want to optimize, or what score do you want to optimize. And as you can see, you don't necessarily need deep learning, and these traditional methods such as random forest can work really well, especially if you have a small amount of data. That's all for me, and I thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mikko, for your interesting talk on your research and yet another good application of these methods. Our next speaker is Jari Silander, and the topic is invasive species, drones, and semantic segmentation. Please.
Thank you. I work for Freshwater Center in SYKE, and we have tried to develop end-to-end services for people to increase the safety and more efficiently map these species. This picture is from the Helsingin Sanomat about 5 years ago when we started one of these projects and when we got interested about invasive species. We have worked with different companies and different organizations over these few years. And then we have had different funders, Ministry of Environment and Agriculture, and then Maa- ja Vesitekniikan Tuki. And also I have to acknowledge these regional environment centers that has helped us to formulate the problems that needs to be solved and the accuracy that is required from these models. There are two problems actually we are thinking. One of this biomass, so it's interesting that where the energy is in these lakes and where are the interesting species that we want to map or monitor or remove from the nature. So those are the drivers of this project. And what we try to do it efficiently means that we should fly as high as possible using as low cost technology as possible. And we have selected drones and optical images for these studies. Over these 5 years, we have mapped in 2 countries over 100 areas, and we had tried to label about 10 different species. One of them is this jättipalsami, and one is this jättiputki you see on the left. And here you will see how detailed you have to be in these annotations when you use this segmentation. This is one drone image, might be up to 40 megabytes depending on the height. And from the above you see these green areas. This is the invasive species by the lake. It's Isosorsimo. And of course we are interested in can we distinguish this species from other similar species as high as possible. And this is the description of our data set. So we have first tried to do so that we can map these in an identical way so that each pilot can produce similar quality data that can be run through the models and get the equally reliable results. And we have used the annotation or labeling level silver to gold. Gold means expert, silver means near experts. So to map the biomass, we only used high resolution images from low altitudes and selected certain species. And this image also shows that the detailness that is required to map these species. And here we use the UNet model, and the results of that are basically here. But now we have to remember that these are with the high resolution, so accuracy of each image is about 3 millimeters or 2 to 4 millimeters resolution. So it's obvious that you get fairly good results with the low volume of labeled data. In this case, I guess we have about 50 labeled images for each of these species. And this is Ari. Ari is taking a sample, measuring number of species and weight, and measuring how much they weigh, so that we could use massing method to estimate the mass of the biomass in these lakes. The second one was actually, this was mapping invasive species or species that are interesting from high altitudes using resolution up to 15 millimeters, so about 1 centimeter maximum. And there we used this kind of PSP models and also tried UNet. model. And currently we have, you notice that we have labeled about 400 images, so it's about 4 gigabytes of data. And the results regarding jättipalsami are still kind of low. Even the accuracy might be higher. So if we talk about accuracy, I can say that's 95%, but this IOU score describes exactly that. When you go in the field and you overlap your observation with the machine learning model, you will soon notice that the actually IOU score is still too low. This would mean that we should find lots of more data in order to develop a good model. Also, we noticed that to get higher altitudes than these are taken about 15 meters. We of course try 10 meters, 15 meters, 20, 30, 40 meters, but it drops very quickly when you go to lower resolutions from depending on the object size. So it's very difficult to use low resolution in higher altitude. So we can actually map these species easily using low-cost technology from 20 meters, but to reach over 30 meters, it has been a challenge for us. And here are the results. Basically, the first green on the left-hand side that is not labeled, and the second image is the labeled images, and the last one is the prediction. And the darker red it is, the higher the probability is that that area belongs to this group. And here you see IOU score that for other classes it's very high because we have lots of water. Of course, the system says there is lots of water and we are accurate on that, but when we try to detect these species from it's much more difficult. And of course, when the objects are simple, then the detection accuracy is of course higher. There are still challenges that we have tried to solve. These are 3 people took images using the same instructions we developed, but still the model doesn't give the similar results. You can see the person number 3 on the right hand side. You will see there's a little red from the same area, but the second person gets a lot of red and the first one gets medium amount of red. So there are quite big differences in these test sites regarding the model. So model really needs to be further developed to get similar results in different areas. Conclusion, yes, we have tried to map these species. We can manage to map this jättiputki, but only about the height of 20 meters using these low-cost drones. So there's lots of work that needs to be done, more annotations, which is very costly. So we would like to try to label more images in the next phase to see that can we really manage to get enough high accuracy for the models. We have, of course, used in different tasks this machine learning method. This is one example of how water scale detection, detecting the water levels using images or the river conditions. And these are the projects that are ongoing or past already. Thank you.
Thank you, Jari. It was a really interesting talk. We will now move on to the last talk of this session. It's by Sakari Väkevä, and the topic is lake ice monitoring with Gaussian mixture models. Please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here reporting our current research on lake ice and how that information is translated from satellite observations into operational products for our end users. So my name is Sakari Väkevä and I work as a researcher at SYKE in the Geoinformatics Research Group. And the purpose of our group is to approach different geospatial datasets from the point of view of research. And we are part of the data-oriented Data and Information Center. So efficient technological solutions, data-oriented research methods such as machine learning are very crucial to us and a key resource. And the work I'm presenting here is part of the researcher Kirsikka Heinilä's work, but she is now out of office, and I'll do my best to replace her now. So that's my first disclaimer, that I have to note that I am just the technical supervisor to our production lines, and there is a lot of methodological development that has happened over time and with different persons. But the production of what? I have been talking about products. Lake ice, seasonal lake ice to be precise, in the Northern Hemisphere. And this work has been supported by the global land component of the Copernicus Land Service, for which we are now provisioning lake ice interpretations. And satellite remote sensing is the basic method. It utilizes a spaceborne mobile platform, that is satellites, to collect optical and thermal spectra over different targets, like in this left picture. But alternatively, it can utilize microwaves and measure the microwave backscatter over targets of varying roughness. And these are called passive and active methods. But I'm mostly focusing on this left side, which is the passive methods, which, if we make a crude oversimplification, they measure color of different landborne targets or the temperature of the thermal radiation emitted by those same targets. So they are sensitive to differences in color and differences in temperature. And our approach is grounded in this tradition of optical remote sensing because it provides a better temporal resolution and swath width than these microwave-based methods. And especially now that lake ice is being included as an explicit variable in many climate models, it is important to have frequent and spatially good information with a good spatial coverage. And in situ observations, some of them cover even longer time periods than what can be achieved with satellites, but there are some crucial limitations. One obvious issue is that in the land of 1,000 lakes, it is not possible to observe all of them with in situ observations. But there are also some other issues, and I will show an example of that soon. And some similar developments have been made already in sea ice interpretation, but we have to note that lake ice often contains optically active substances such as humus or turbid substances, and it is a totally different problem in lake context than in sea ice context. And we shall also see an example of that soon. But about the limitations of in situ, another crucial limitation is that if we consider this example from Lake Vesijärvi near Lahti, the possible in situ monitoring site that could be placed in that bay in the southwestern side of the figure, that only covers this bay and is not representative of the lake as a whole. So even if the station reports an ice-off at the end of April, the basin is still half ice covered. And this is also a problem for the matchups between satellite data and in situ. And then about this spectral information, which is sometimes quite ambiguous. Even an untrained observer can see that the ice is at this dark bluish part of the image. But where does it continue? Is the ice margin here? In practice, it is not, because the ice is transparent, and what you can see there is the turbid water beneath the ice. So even that part to the south of that line is ice covered. Well, maybe the ice margin is here. Well, not exactly, because if you zoom into that part of the picture, you can see that there is a crevasse, and that's in the ice. So that part of the figure is also ice covered. So the true ice margin is there. And this proves that it's not all the way, it can be quite ambiguous where to, like which spectra to assign to lake ice classes and which to assign to open water. That illustrated some of the issues, but another one is clouds, which are a nuisance with all optical remote sensing. And our solution to this has been one machine learning technique called which we have named IceMod, and at its core is a Gaussian mixture model, which is unsupervised learning algorithm. And just an overview of the result that this algorithm outputs classes ice, water, or cloud based on the input observations, which are bands from the thermal infrared instrument. In brief, the Gaussian mixture models, they take the whole of the data into account and they try to fit many different distributions with normal Gaussian normal distributions into that. And in this case, we are using way more fitting distributions for the training than what we fundamentally aim for. So that works as a hidden layer within the classificator, and those 21 distributions are reduced into 3 cases: ice, open, water, and cloud. And finally, these have been validated against a test set that is formed using a similar classifier on the high-resolution Sentinel-2 images, but then with minor quality checks and manual corrections to those after that. But as you can see in the top right image, this pre-classifier also works with the higher resolution Sentinel-2 images, and that also shows one benefit of this model, since it can be generalized for to work for any instrument and any satellite platform, at least in principle. This shows some examples of what the validation work was about. We had a lot of different areas in all continents because our aim is to create a work that is to create a product that works for the northern hemisphere as a whole. And some of the results from the validation are shown in this contingency table to the left. The accuracies are quite high, but that is also partly due to the blind layer or the hidden layer that is reclassified into those 3 final classes, and also because we are using some empirical thresholds in the end to make sure that we are not hitting any wrong classifications, which is crucial in an operational product like this one, which is currently being delivered and is also partially in use somewhere in the world. And to the right, you can also see that the bottom figure shows the result of our new classifier, and the middle image is from the European Space Agency's Climate Change Initiative classified product. And our method shows an improvement over that operational product, especially if you compare with the more higher resolution Sentinel-2 true color image, which is in the top panel. Thank you. This was all I had to say, and I think I had even 30 seconds time left of that 10 minutes, but I have now said everything I need, and there was something before the question section, so onwards in the program.
Thank you, Sakari, for this interesting talk. We will actually have a comment talk by Otso Ovaskainen, but before that I would like to thank you and all the other speakers of this session. Really interesting topics of applications tackling many problems. And now Otso has promised to reflect and comment the talks we have been hearing. Please.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me and see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So today has been a really fantastic seminar about this topic, machine learning and artificial intelligence in nature conservation and research. So what I'll do now is to tell very briefly about my own research interests and then reflect today's presentations against that. So what I'm really interested about is community ecology. So to understand, infer the drivers and processes behind biodiversity dynamics, for example, against this conceptual framework of ecological assembly rules. And when we address these kind of questions in community ecology, try to find the drivers, we typically have these kind of data that are not directly on the drivers, but on the patterns. So we have data on the species communities, the matrix Y here, environmental conditions, the matrix X here. Maybe we have data on species traits and their phylogenetic or taxonomic relationships in some spatiotemporal context. And now in my field, which is really statistical ecology, the challenge is that how to best use these kind of data on patterns to address the research questions that are typically about the processes. So the question of inference is to understand those processes that have shaped the data. And then the other key task that we typically have is that of prediction, how, for example, species communities would change in the context of global change. Now, my specific core area is joint species distribution modeling. Last year, I published this book with Nerea Abreko, which explains the methods in detail, but very briefly, these methods, they take as input the data matrices that I just described, environmental conditions, species distributions, and traits and phylogenies, and then they use all of that data to fit one model that encompasses all of that information, and then you can use that model for inference and prediction. So while listening to today's presentation, I was listening it through the kind of my own research interest and biases, and this is how I classified the talks from today, not by artificial intelligence, but kind of my own a bit superficial intelligence. So Eero, of course, gave a fantastic overview about the methods, how machine learning and artificial intelligence works. But then almost all of the other talks I put to this box of biodiversity research and monitoring, which is really of my very own core interest. So we had really fantastic talks by Mikko, Petteri, Ville-Matti, Andrea, Kaisa, and Jari, which were all about how do we get data on these species themselves, either from image or sound data. How do we classify the species automatically from those kind of massive data? Then, in my view, like Jenni, Mikko, and Sakari, they all described these exciting possibilities on how to use satellite images to generate really high-resolution data on the environment, which I have here in the kind of the X matrix. Vasko's talk, that was really refreshing, really different approach, where the data, where the existing literature, all existing literature, which you can kind of mine with the AI methods to, in this case, learn something about species traits, species properties or attributes, in this case, still red listing, but for sure you can use the same kind of methods also to infer other kinds of information of species. And then Toivo described a completely different approach, which is how you can use these methods or combination of methods to digitalize museum collections, for example, using image data. And museum collections, they really hold massive information about species occurrences, so you can generate community data from them. The specimens, they have all the traits that we can measure. And of course, museum collections have massive information about species taxonomies and phylogenies. So in that sense, Toivo's methods, they kind of populate many of these matrices that I'm interested about. Then we had one very different talk about policy management by Iikka, using Twitter data to understand what do politicians think about, or at least what they talk about. And then policy management is, of course, very closely related to biodiversity research and monitoring. I would say that Andrea, Jenni, Jari, Mikko, and Sakari, they all had some elements that kind of link these two boxes, are at the interface of these, like going more applied than just doing research from the more fundamental point of view. Now, what did we not hear about today, where I personally think that AI is highly relevant and interesting? classifying species from DNA barcoding data. I think this is one of the mega trends in biodiversity research, and AI has certainly a big role here. And then the other topic is using AI in ecological modeling, for example, species distribution models, making predictions for future of biodiversity. AI has a big role here, but today's talks were not explicit about this. So I wish that maybe in the next seminar about this topic, we could hear about these kinds of topics as well. My final slide, some major trends, common observations from the presentations today. The first one is that there is a need for AI. We have increasingly massive data, we simply can't analyze them anymore manually. Second point, we can do it. AI methods are developing very fast, and they are increasingly easy to use also for non-experts. Third point, it works in practice. Results are almost as good as with expert evaluation, at least when you apply them to similar test data as was the training data. But then the final question mark, is it already useful for practical management and environmental policy? So there are exciting possibilities, but can we and when can we really apply these in practical management? So these were my reflections from today's really fantastic seminar, and I think this was really extremely useful, at least for my own interest, and I really hope this becomes a regular event that SYKE will organize also in the future. Thank you.